This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, a weekly vlog series I do where I talk about limited magic. We're in Crimson Vow Limited right now. We're sort of entering into the waning period of Crimson Vow Limited at this point, but we're still in it, and as a result I've been talking about it several weeks in a row, and we're going to talk about it some today as well. But I also wanted to tackle a broader limited topic, one that is inspired by Crimson Vow. So Crimson Vow, famously, as we all know at this point, has a lot more like game-breaking bombs in it than your typical set does. And, you know, for most of us, that's sort of a detracting feature of the format, but that is the case nonetheless. And because people are talking about bombs so much right now, I wanted to sort of do a top 10 list. This is kind of a video that's sort of like an MTG top 10, I guess, but it's a Nizzanotes video because it's not scripted or anything, and I'm, on camera the whole time. And there aren't going to be any fancy visuals, so, it's a Nizzanotes episode, sort of like an MTG top 10, because I'm going to take a look at what I think are the 10 biggest bombs in the entire history of limited Magic. Now remember, in Magic, a bomb is a good thing, and it refers to a card that just utterly takes over the game and is incredibly difficult to defeat. And I thought this would be interesting to look at because, how do the bombs from Crimson Vow stack up? Do any Crimson Vow bombs show up in this list? Well, you're going to get the answer pretty quickly because I think the 10th biggest bomb of all time is Toxil. So Toxil's one problem, if there's only one really, is that it costs 7 mana. He almost immediately, if you manage to get to the end step of your turn, he almost immediately impacts your opponent's board, usually killing at least one thing, which means you're getting one slug. Now, he does need to stick around one more turn to really go insane, but it's not that big of an ask, especially in the later part of the game when people's removal is often depleted. Toxil can just come down and end games very easily. You don't even have to talk about its activated ability to sacrifice slugs and all of this. It's just going to decimate your opponent's board very quickly. By the end of your second end step, your opponent just basically can never win the game, and Toxil takes over from there. So, he's at number 10 on this list because he costs so much, but he's definitely one of the bombs where when it hits the table has the most difficult to defeat effect that we've really ever seen. I mean, if you don't have removal for this, you are 100% dead. There's not really another way out of it, and Toxil just takes over games. At number 9, I've got Citadel Siege. That is from Fate Reforged. That's kind of the last set I can really think of that had a problem with bombs, similar to what we're seeing right now. And it was kind of more of a problem in that set, if you can believe it, because Fate Reforged was a small set. This was back in the day where you had block releases with one big set and then a small set, and you would be drafting 2 packs of Fate Reforged, and there's only 150, I'll put the actual number on the screen, but not very many cards in the set, and the rares that were in the set, many of them were bonkers, and one of them is Citadel Siege. Just looking at this card, you might not think that much of it, but it is, trust me, insanely powerful. At 4 mana, you usually named cons. At 4 mana, you got to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control. Now, a good comparison to this is that Halana and Alana card in this set right now, which costs 2 different colors of mana and is on a creature, and it kind of has the same effect, where you enter combat and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on something right away. Sure, Citadel Siege isn't a creature, but in a lot of ways, that's a benefit. It was very hard to deal with Citadel Siege. The turn it came down, it would give you value right away, and it would just keep doing it. If you're getting 2 +1/+1 counters every one of your combats, you're just going to win the game. This came down very early, made games insurmountable very quickly, and that's what made it the biggest bomb in that set, and one of the biggest bombs in the entire history of Magic. You didn't really ever name dragons, but there were definitely situations where that added flexibility could give you lethal or something, and that's insane to add on top of the very, very powerful cons effect, which is what you usually chose anyway. At number 8, I've got Mascot Exhibition. Yeah, this is a pretty recent one from Strixhaven. This is another one where when you look at it, it isn't that impressive, and it's really not. Like, if this card weren't a lesson, it wouldn't be anywhere near this list, not even close to it. But the fact it's a lesson just makes it kind of insane. Once you did cast the exhibition, it had a huge impact on the board. And again, on power level alone, this isn't a bomb. What makes it a bomb is the fact that it effectively starts in your hand at the beginning of every single game. You're going to get this powerful card every single game. And the format was slow enough and there was enough ramp that casting Mascot Exhibition was pretty trivial. Like, it wasn't hard to cast at all, even though it might kind of look like it. And yeah, you would have 4 or 5 lessons. That means you have 4 or 5 cards in your deck that also grab you what is one of, if not the most powerful card in your deck anyway. And that's what makes it kind of an interesting card and an interesting design, because again, in a vacuum, compared to the other cards on this list, making these 3 tokens doesn't seem like much, but when that card is always in your opening hand, it's pretty insane. And speaking of which, our number 7 bomb on this list is another group. It's a group of cards, and it's most of the companions anyway, before they got nerfed. Originally, the companion rule worked so that the card was just in its own zone, and you could just cast it from there at any point during the game, as long as you met the companion requirement. So, like Mascot Exhibition, these effectively started in your opening hand, and even more so, because you didn't have to play a lesson or something like that to get to it. The difference is you do have to meet a companion requirement, and this is another really interesting design, because basically, universally, people were looking at these for limited when Aquaria came out, and they were like, man, most of these just have too strong of a requirement. You're going to have to make your deck bad enough that it's just not worth it. And I was one of those people for most of them. And it turns out we were all wrong. Playing a bunch of extra cards for Yorion, or only playing 3 mana or higher cards for Karuga, or any of these crazy things was well worth it for basically all of them. The one exception to this was the red-white one, which was very hard to make work, but the other 9 were pretty much always going to be worth it. They always had a very powerful effect. Many of them were just the best card in your deck and would be like close to a bomb anyway, unlike Mascot Exhibition. And the fact that you just always had them and had an 8th card in your opening hand was insane. And it contributed a lot to Aquaria being a problematic format, because imagine, in this set we have all these bombs, right? Imagine if for 10 of those bombs, or 9, I guess, they started in your opening hand every game. And that's what you have with Aquaria. That's what the problem was. One of the problems with that set. Once they nerfed companions and you had to pay 3 to put it into your hand, and then you also had to cast it, made a big difference. And made them not really on this list anymore, but, we all remember what the companions in Aquaria were like before they got nerfed. Number 6, I have another group of cards, and it's the Titans. These are especially annoying because they appeared in more than one core set, and they are incredibly powerful bombs. It's kind of funny. Of these 5, Primeval Titans, the most famous and the most powerful and constructed, certainly by a wide margin, but it's actually the worst of these, and I'm not even sure he really deserves to be on this list. Searching up mana in limited, especially because you can't grab basics. I mean, you can't grab non-basics because you probably don't have any. Isn't that impressive? So he's actually the weakest of these and probably doesn't really deserve to be included. The other 4 do, though. They all have very big impacts on the game, and what makes them really strong is they have this enter the battlefield trigger that gives you something right away. So even if they get killed, you get that thing right away. And then if you just attack with one of them once and get that trigger again, whether it's getting back a 3 mana thing from your graveyard, or freezing down an opponent's creature, or arc lightninging, or I guess it's forked bolting your opponent's board, all of those things are completely insane, and they all also happen to be 6 mana 6/6s with useful keyword abilities, so they could really snowball and take over games. At number 5, I have Avabrook Caretaker. So this is our second Crimson Vow card on this list. You probably don't need me to go super deep on this one because you've probably seen it lately. But yeah, I mean, the problem here is that this is an incredibly powerful creature that also has hexproof. Once you add hexproof to the mix here, it gets insane. Both sides of the card are crazy good. You get a couple of counters, sort of like Citadel Siege with the body. You get a couple of counters on the front, and then on the back you get counters and hexproof on your whole board. It's just crazy. It's very difficult to beat. I did manage to beat it once in this format, although in the same draft I also later lost to another deck playing it, which was kind of a bummer. But it was fun to beat it once, but the only way you can really do it is if your opponent's board state is real bad when they play it. And the Caretaker does need another creature or 2 to start getting going, generally speaking. And I just sort of flew over and killed my opponent before they could amass enough value to really kill us. But that's almost never going to happen. You're almost always going to lose to Avabrook Caretaker and all the other cards on this list. It's just insanely good. Next up, I have Tetsamach. So This dinosaur doesn't have hexproof or anything like that. It's not that hard to kill, but the problem that the card has and what makes it so incredibly good is that while it's in your hand just hanging out, you can pay 1 black mana and reveal it and just start putting counters on things, on your opponent's creatures. And then when Tetsamach enters the battlefield, he just blows up everything he put a counter on while he was in your hand. And that often results in maybe not a one-sided wrath, although sometimes it does, but usually results in 2 or 3 things dying and you having a pretty sizable, impressive dinosaur. And if your opponent, the one downside this card has is like as a top deck, when you have like exactly 6 mana, it's not that great. That's a downside, I guess. But provided you have extra mana, like in the extreme late game, or you have it in your opening hand and you just use it when you have a mana lying around every turn, it's just going to be insane, blow up a bunch of your opponent's stuff. And if you didn't already have like an impressive board state, now you do, because your opponent doesn't have anything and you have Tetsamach. And number 3, I have Dreamtrawler. So this is another creature with hexproof. So, that's fun. At least it doesn't always have hexproof. You do have to have a card to discard, but if you're playing this card, it's not very hard to have. And what makes it great is, first of all, your opponent basically will never kill it. Second of all, it's got lifelink and flying, so on many board states it can attack very easily. And the lifelink makes it so even if you were behind, your opponent's going to have a very difficult time racing you. And on top of that, it also just happens to draw you cards. It's a card drawing engine. It's a win condition in the air, and it's almost impossible to kill for your opponent. It's got lifelink, so it's pretty hard for your opponent to ever kill you. You can, in a pinch, even use it to block pretty effectively. It's basically always attacking as a 4/5, or rather a 5/5, because you draw a card and then you draw another when it attacks. And that's a huge creature for the mana cost. It's a little sort of tricky mana value-wise, but you had good enough mana to make it work. This card was an insane bomb in Theros Beyond Death, and I think one of the biggest bombs ever. All right, from here we move to number 2, where I've got Packrat. So this is another card. It's funny how many of these I think there are that someone might look at and be like, really? Is that big of a bomb? And this is another one where I think that might be the case. Dreamtrawler and Tetsamach and Avabruck Caretaker and the Titans aren't like that. But I think Citadel Siege to an extent, Mascot Exhibition, and now Packrat kind of are. It's like, what's the big deal? This is just a rat. What's so scary about it? And what makes it insane is its ability to multiply. So you can just start discarding cards to make copies, and there comes a point pretty quickly where just doing that is better than casting spells on your turn. So no matter what you draw, you're discarding it and making another rat, which makes your other rats bigger. That rat's a copy of all the other rats, and that means also that it's impossible without a board sweeper for your opponent to get the situation under control. The rats are just going to keep multiplying. Flavor-wise, makes a lot of sense. And there's not a lot they can do to stop it. The only way you can stop Packrat is if your opponent foolishly completely taps out to play it and doesn't leave mana up to make a copy. Anyone who's playing Packrat knows not to do that, though, and thus you're not going to deal with Packrat. Your opponent will just play it when they have a card in hand and the mana available, and they'll just start making Packrat tokens, and the game will be over before you know it. And at number 1, it is Umizawa's Jite. If you've played a lot of Limited, if you've played for a long time or just heard people talk about Limited, you knew this was going to be number 1, most likely. This card is another one, though, that I think you kind of look at and you're like, what's the big deal? It needs to do so much stuff to actually have an impact on the game. I mean, it's an equipment. You have to pay 2 to play it and 2 to equip. And those things are true. The problem is kind of that same thing. This costs 2 mana up front, right? So you get it on the board very early. And then you start equipping it to things, and it makes literally any creature you have into a very, very serious problem. Getting charge counters with this is too easy. They needed to make it so you had to hit your opponent or something, because just any sort of damage, combat damage, that is, gives you 2 charge counters. They also needed to decrease the number of charge counters you got. And then you can use those charge counters for 3 different things. The nastiest of these in Limited is the ability to give a creature -1/-1. Basically, it turns into a removal spell. And again, all you have to do is stick this on anything, even if it's going to die when it's attacking. Attack with it. You have 2 charge counters. The value you get from those charge counters will offset whatever creature you had die. And once you have creatures who are surviving combat, which will get easier and easier thanks to those charge counters, which can also bump your creature, you're just never going to get ahead of this card. Your opponent won't be able to block and kill your creature because you'll be able to pump it, then you'll get more charge counters, and the cycle continues. And believe it or not, as good as this would still be today, it was even better back then because combat damage still used the stack during Kamigawa, the time of Kamigawa, the original Kamigawa. I guess we're about to go there again. And that meant that when you did combat damage, you could get these charge counters, and you would have a chance to use those charge counters before combat, before your creature would die. And so you could shrink your opponent's creature so that suddenly it can't win the combat, even though you had to do the damage in the first place to get those counters. This is why they got rid of this rule. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That combat damage would use the stack, and it's very confusing, but that's how it worked. You could pump your creature or weaken your opponent. Suddenly your creature wins combat even though it wasn't going to, and your creature sticks around equipped with the Jite. So it just snowballs. You start killing creatures, pumping yours. I mean, the gain life part, at least that's not insane, right? I mean, that one comes up sometimes if you're really far behind, but most of the time you're using the other two, and they are hugely powerful. And the fact that you had to, see this on turn 2 and sort of look at your hand and be like, and your deck and be like, wow, I don't have any artifact removal, or I have one artifact removal spell in my deck, I better draw it. That's the real problem. You can equip this very early in the game, and the game's pretty much over once you attack once with it. And that's what makes Umizawa's Jite the biggest bomb we've ever seen. So those are my picks for the 10 biggest bombs ever. You can see I have 2 Crimson Vow cards on it. There may be a little bit of recency bias. I could see maybe Toxil slipping off the list in the future. I don't think Everbrook Caretaker ever will. And if Everbrook Caretaker ever does fall off this list, we're going to have a problem because it means some more insane things are happening in another limited format. But yeah, that's, Crimson Vow has a lot of bombs, 2 that make this list for me, and, like 28 others that don't make the list but are still insane bombs. So now let's do a crack-a-pack for Crimson Vow to close out this edition of Nizzanotes. I'll show you a pack 1, pick 1 scenario, talk about each of the cards in the pack, and tell you which one I would first pick. All right, here's our pack. Our first common is Desperate Farmer. This is a solid little card. It's not that hard to transform. When it does, you get a pretty good deal for your mana. The lifelink plays well in black-white. It's easy to transform in like blue-black. It's easy to transform anywhere. It's a solid common for pretty much any black deck, but not really something you take early. Falconwrath Celebrants. This card's been nice. I mean, it's a nice top curve to have, especially in the black-red deck, because you can often do things with those blood tokens. But really, in any red deck, it turns out like just its size plus menace on a lot of board states creates enough of a problem or gives you a real win condition that it's been a little better than I expected. I would take it over Desperate Farmer, but I do really hope I'm not taking it out of this pack. It would have to be one of the worst packs ever. It's a solid common, like I said, but not something you want to be first picking. Sporeback Wolf, been a fine 2-drop. The red-green deck likes to have as many wolves and werewolves as possible, so this sees a decent amount of play. Another card I wouldn't really want to take, I would take Falconwrath Celebrants over it. Valdarin Epicure. Okay, well now we're in the neighborhood of a card that I think you do first pick sometimes, and that's kind of crazy because it's like, this is just a 1/1. But it does enough little things. It has a useful creature type. It gives you blood right away, which you can often utilize very early in the game. And it just pinging the opponent. All these little things just really add up. And I do hope I don't first pick it, but I would definitely take it over the Celebrants. Making sure you have blood early and that you're on the board early really matters in this format. In the festivities, this is a card that's almost entirely a sideboard card. It's a little better in this format than one might think just because there are several good X1s in the set. But it's still not something you should ever play in your main deck. It's something you'll side in against opponents with lots of X1s. Obviously, we don't take it. That means I'm still on the Epicure. We've got Dawnheart Disciple next. Nice little 2-drop, especially in green-white. It often attacks as a 3/3. Epicure is definitely better, though. Fear of Death. This is another, sort of solid common. That's mostly what this whole bottom row has been, apart from the Epicure, which I'm a little more excited about than the others. This, part of the problem this card has is that the blue-green deck hasn't been great, and it wants you to be in that deck. It gives you a way to mill yourself, which is kind of useful, but you do find that just decreasing a creature's power isn't really enough most of the time. The only reason it ends up getting sort of an upgrade is because the blue-white deck cares about enchantments, and that makes it into a solid playable instead of something worse. but still we're on the Epicure, and I would take the Disciple and Celebrants over it too. Aim for the Head. This is a card you can play on occasion. You kind of hope you don't for the most part, but you know, mind rotting your opponent isn't too bad, and you know, the zombie mode comes up. Probably something you start in your sideboard though, and so we're still on the Epicure. Heron Blessed Geist. This is another just sort of solid common, a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. If your deck has graveyard and or enchantment things, well, you kind of need both, I guess, going on. You can turn it into 2 tokens from your graveyard, which is a nice effect, but it's kind of a clunky card in a format that's been fast enough that it's not incredible, but it's a card you play a lot in blue, especially in blue-white. Still, easily a Voldaren Epicure pick, and I would also take, well, it's probably the second best card now, the Heron Blessed Geist. I think it's probably the second best card now. Next, we've got Steel-Clad Spirit. You know, nice defensive creature for like the blue-red or the blue-green decks when you end up there. And fine in the blue-white deck too. The fact it doesn't attack is a pretty big bummer. You know, yeah, you've got enchantments and stuff, but the deck is fairly aggressive usually, blue-white. And so this doesn't actually play super well in the deck. It's fine there, but I think it's better in blue-green, blue-red, blue-black decks that are more defensive. But still, we're on Epicure, followed by Heron Blessed Geist, probably followed by Celebrants. We move into uncommons now, and our first one's a nice one. It's Parasitic Grasp. This card's great. It's very good. It's premium removal. Even if it didn't have the option to be cheaper when you use it on humans, you would love this card. You know, killing a thing and gaining 3 life, just, you know, it really makes you feel safe in a game of Magic a lot of the time. You know, kill it, especially if it's their best creature and you were low on life, this can really help you stabilize. Doesn't hurt that there's a life gain deck in the format, but it's good in all the decks. And it's easily what we would first pick here. It's miles better than our Epicure and other stuff. Skull Scob is next. This is our Signpost uncommon. You know, some Signpost uncommons I feel okay about super aggressively first picking in this format. This isn't really one of them. It's nice. It's a cool engine. It's fun to play with. But the exploit deck overall hasn't really gotten off the ground as well as I would have hoped. Mostly because the format's fast. And this is a card, you know, a deck where you kind of don't want to be too fast because you want to like build value with your exploit. And it's a perfectly fine card. But between being multicolored and the color pair it represents being kind of medium, it's definitely Parasitic Grasp over the Scob. Next up, we've got Innocent Traveler. So all 3 of our uncommons are black. Innocent Traveler is a cool card. It's another one with a really neat design, cool flavor. Not a card, I mean, I think you play it a lot, but it's not a card you want to take very early. It's kind of a C-level card, despite sort of having all this cool text. Basically, you're giving your opponent a choice, and anytime you do that, and the choices aren't like that, punishing, like if both are very punishing options most of the time, it can be good. Not the case here always. If your opponent has expendable creatures, they'll just be giving those up and sacrificing to it. And if they don't care about a 3/3 or 5/3 flyer, they'll just let it transform. And you will find yourself in enough situations where your opponent doesn't really care one way or the other, and you're not really giving them a pick your poison option. They're just choosing a thing that doesn't hurt them very much. And that's a bummer for a 4-mana 1/3 to just not do much other than that. So I would definitely take Parasitic Grasp here, followed by the Epicure. So yeah, we have a rare, of course. It's a land though, and you don't want to be taking these dual lands early. It's not that kind of format. It's kind of funny. We talked about bombs in this video, and this is our rare. Definitely don't take it. This is not a great pack. There's lots of solid cards in it. You know, there's not that much that's unplayable. I guess the only really like card that I never would play is In the Festivities. Aim for the Heads, leaning in that direction. But the rest are all solid playables, at least, so maybe it's not that weak. It just doesn't have a really high ceiling. With Grasp, really the only card in this pack I'm excited about first picking. The Epicure, you know, is fine to first pick, but I kind of hope that's not what's happening. So that is our Crack-A-Pack. That's the video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of Nizzanotes, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past edition of Nizzanotes, see me actually draft this format, stuff like that. I have a bunch of those videos on the channel, and you'll see some playlists for those shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and my channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.